SBC Media.
Welcome to the iGaming Daily Podcast, analysing the news from the betting and gaming industry all over the globe, supported by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market.
Depending on who you ask, Resorts World Las Vegas was hit with a massive fine of more than $10 million related to anti-money laundering failings. It was the second largest fine in Nevada gaming history, but there is a question of whether or not it was big enough. We're going to discuss that as well as a revolving door bill on the docket in Florida on today's episode of iGaming Daily. iGaming Daily is brought to you by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market. I am Jessica Welman, managing editor of SBC Media, joined by media manager Charlie Horner. Charlie, I don't like that we don't do this every week anymore, but when you're back, it just makes me extremely happy.
Yeah, no, I'm glad to be back. Obviously, Tom Nightingale has stepped up and he's doing a fantastic job, but it's nice to get the call up.
Yeah, I figured you would enjoy this one because I think we love kind of asking questions about regulations. We've done so much of this over the past year or two, and I think you were still at SBC Americas at the very start of the whole Scott Sabella scandal, right? Did you write a little bit about kind of the MGM resort side of his issues?
Yeah, I think I was still writing on SBC Americas at the time because when this story broke, or the update that we're going to talk about today, it did ring bells. So I'd imagine I did write on the original beat.
Yeah, so for those who are not familiar, I'm sure you can go back into the podcast annals and find an episode about this. Scott Sabella was an executive in Las Vegas who worked for MGM Resorts and then moved over to be the president of Resorts World Las Vegas, which opened, in the last 5 years. It was post-COVID, I believe, and has since been involved in 2 very high-profile cases in which, under his management, these casinos really failed to prevent people from using money they obtained illegally to gamble at casinos. So there was a complaint that was settled with MGM Resorts, this Resorts World one. They had, announced the Nevada Gaming Control Board that there were issues, and this past week they came back with what the fine was. It is the second largest fine in Nevada gaming history, $10.5 million. I guess let's just start with the big question. Do you think this fine was big enough?
Yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it? Because gambling is such a big, so exposed to these kind of anti-money laundering issues, and they're very, very high profile when they do happen. And it's something that regulators, operators, and even suppliers are working very, very hard to avoid. That when these moments do come up, you feel like they should be severely punished. And I'd imagine there's quite a lot of listeners who are thinking, well, this probably isn't big enough. I was just thinking about some of the biggest fines in the UK when it comes to these kind of things, and William Hill had to pay, I think it was £19.2 million for a series of AML breaches. I think it might have been last year or the year before, and I think if you do a conversion of this $10 million, it's about £7 million. So there's a bit of a gap there, and there might be a bit of a gap in terms of how severe this is, but you might, I think some might say, yeah, this probably could have been a little bit bigger.
Here is my complaint with this number. For those unfamiliar with the case, this is related to largely a gambler named Matthew Boyer, who worked with the bookmaker that is at the center of the Shohei Ohtani interpreter case, the Ippei Mizuhani one. In the complaint, or, the findings, they determined that this guy lost at least $7.9 million at Resorts World. And other people are kind of named in this case. There was another poker player. I'm going to get his name wrong unless I look it up. So, Damien LaForbes, also kind of named in this as well. And I've got to say, I'm guessing he lost a couple $1 million. So if you're just going to have to basically pay back what you reaped from your failings, it doesn't feel like that much of a punishment to me. This guy, I mean, LaForbes, I think, lost several $1 million too. So it might even be that they still profited from the fact that they let these people come and gamble at their property with, like, not just, oh, we messed up. This isn't, we clicked the wrong box, there was a technical error, etc., etc. I mean, far-reaching anti-money laundering failings here, where they let this man's wife be his casino host. They did absolutely no proof of funds checks. They, given kind of what we've heard about Scott Sabella at MGM, it's entirely possible that he was fully aware of where this money was coming from. The wife, absolutely. Unless this is just the weirdest marriage ever, the wife has to know that this money did not, he doesn't have a job, so it didn't come from that. Like, I know that he takes bets all day. I know that he does this all day. Like, the likelihood she didn't know that she needed to vet where these came from is just slim to nil. So that's why she lost her license. It bothers me immensely that this fine is not bigger. Because honestly, when I read this, I was thinking truly that in order for this to look like they're really doing something about it, in my head, I was like, this is going to have to be like twice what the biggest fine has ever been was, which is, it's like a little over $20 million. And it is got nothing to do with AML failings. It's the Steve Wynn sexual harassment, bad, which is a terrible thing as well. But you would think that these two things are both big enough that this second biggest fine wouldn't be half of what the biggest is.
Yeah, I mean, there's got to have been plenty of discussions between lawyers, regulators about what this fine was going to be. Can't help but feel like they might have taken the easy route by fostering some sort of relationship with Resorts World and their lawyers and saying, well, we have to punish you, but it's this is the second largest fine in our history. So yeah, it does feel like what would they have to have done for it to be a record breaking fine?
I recall when we did this first story, I believe we actually kind of asked the question, is this what you have to do to lose a license? And this is as someone who lived in Las Vegas for 13 years, this is kind of the problem. Resorts World is this new huge project that employs thousands of Nevadans. So if you revoke that license, you are putting thousands of people out of a job. So I get that, but that's what I kind of hate about it, right? Is that the threat of losing your license is just never really on the table. You would have to just really do something really awful to even come close to having your license in peril, which is why we have fines. I guess that's kind of, the question is, for some people, what is the purpose on regulatory fines? Is it to keep people compliant? Is it to make an example out of people? I mean, do you have strong feelings one way or the other of how fines should function?
Well, it should be to send a message. I think send a message to not only the operator in question, but to the wider industry, to say, if you break our regulations, if you do things that are outside of this framework, you're going to be punished and you should be held to account for it. I think there should be an aspect of punishment, because if you're not being severely punished in a way that negatively impacts you, you're just going to do it again because it makes no difference. And if you want to enforce a regulatory framework in a way that prevents future sort of breaches, then you have to have those guardrails in place and those punishments in place to ensure that the operators don't do it again. And I think issuing large fines is probably the best weapon in the regulators' sort of arsenal.
I mean, let's play a quick game of what if. What if this was Resorts World Boston and the Massachusetts Gaming Commission had to handle this? I will point out that in December, Massachusetts fined FanDuel $10,000 for accepting $11 in prohibited wagers.
Take that ratio.
So that's what I love. That's why I love the MGC, though. It's just no, there are rules, and those rules are going to cost you money, and we're going to make sure you never do this again. So we are going to make you pay 1,000-fold what you profited off of this to ensure that it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, I mean, well, if you did that in this situation, I don't think we'd have a Resorts World left to...
They may not lose their license. They may just lose every penny they've ever made in their lives. Yeah. By that math, it would be what, a $1 billion fine, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, but the serious point is that maybe not $1 billion fine, but a more substantial fine would ensure that Resorts World and any other operator who might have theoretically glossed over their AML procedures, maybe hadn't done any training recently, they would absolutely make sure that those AML processes were in place, that staff were trained to the fullest ability to ensure that it didn't happen, because they wouldn't want to get the $1 billion fine next time.
Yeah, I'm going to just, pull up the soapbox, get on it one more time as we wrap this up. You cannot, as an industry, continually point the finger at the black market and sweepstakes and DFS and say, you don't have AML, you don't have KYC, you don't have these things, and that's why you're bad and we're good, and you shouldn't be in business and we should be in business, if you are not going to actually follow AML proceedings. To add to it, to then take the profits of these and accept them at your casino makes it even more unpalatable to me that we continue to just stump that the black market is so terrible. I don't disagree that it is. The unregulated space, I think that there are a lot of legal questions there that I am not a lawyer and capable of answering. But plenty of them have these things kind of voluntarily in place. And I just get frustrated and tired and roll my eyes at this constant kind of looking down on them when it's just clean up your own house before you start casting stones.
Well, that's it. It is it's a cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason. It's people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones, and I think we're in that situation right now. Yeah,
I'm making loads of friends in the regulated gaming industry with that statement, but it's just how I feel about it. I think I've said as much before many places. So glad to hear, Charlie, that you're fairly aligned with me and I'm not totally crazy. I've been on a real run lately on the pod of just being let me get real upset about something. So once again, I am going to calm down and we will come back and talk about something a little more mundane, but somewhat related to this topic.
SBC Leaders connects the gambling industry's top-tier operators and associations to share the best ideas, collaborate on solving the biggest issues, and push innovation throughout the betting and gaming industry. If you're an operator and want to join the discussion, visit sbcleaders.com for more information.
All right, welcome back to iGaming Daily. We are covering so many bills that it is somewhat difficult to keep tabs on all of them. And this one's a fairly small one, but I figured it would make sense to talk about it. In Florida, as part of a very large kind of gaming package, there's a bill that wants to very specifically address the idea of people moving from the regulatory space into the private sector and put kind of guardrails in place for how long this can, people have to wait before they're allowed to move. Charlie, have you read this? I'm assuming you didn't read the 92-page bill because you don't have to do that anymore, but you read our story about it. I mean, you've kind of heard, I assume in Europe you have similar kind of guardrails in place, or no?
I guess with regulators and moving into the operator space, I don't think that tends to happen as much. But there's definitely sort of that revolving door policy when it comes to politicians leaving the political sphere and then taking up sort of advisory roles or big positions in the industry. So, for example, the Betting and Gaming Council in the UK was led by former Labour MP Michael Dugar, and the former deputy leader of the Labour Party, Tom Watson, took up an advisory role with Flutter after he left Parliament. So maybe not in the same way as what we're talking about here, but there's definitely that sort of culture of leaving the sort of public sector and then entering the private.
Yeah, there's a lot of the local press kind of have made this about the fact that the Florida Gambling Control Commission director, Louis Trombetta, left his post and then immediately went to work for FanDuel in a director of government relations position. I don't think that what he did is particularly surprising, strange, or out of line the way that the local press has kind of depicted it. We've seen lots of people do this. You know, Sequoia Simmermeyer, also with FanDuel, went from being in an Indian gaming, tribal gaming regulatory role to working for them. I'm sure Kathy Judd-Stein is consulting with people at the moment. Brant Iden was a lawmaker, now works for Fanatics in government relations. It makes plenty of sense for those people who are very experienced on the other side of it to come work for you. And I don't think that that's necessarily wrong. The part that does look a little iffy is that recall that Florida regulators sent letters to various DFS operators like Underdog and Prize Picks, informing them that all forms of fantasy sports gaming are illegal in Florida and asking them to leave. People who did not get that letter, DraftKings, FanDuel. So that's where I'm gonna raise a little eyebrow, but maybe I'm out of line. Charlie, what do you think?
No, when I read the story, I think that's one of the first things that came to mind for me as well. Was, yeah, I remember those cease and desist letters going out, and obviously the big omission was the DraftKings and FanDuel. So yeah, you can see from an optics point of view why there might be a bit of angst towards this move.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess like having them sit out for 2 years, which is what the bill is proposing, does make sure that there's not a lot of like behind the scenes horse trading and that sort of thing. But again, I don't think in this case, does it necessarily look amazing? Not really, but I doubt that if you told me like there's some bombshell story that like he agreed to take this post by not sending a cease and desist letter to FanDuel about Florida DFS, I would really be surprised.
Yeah, we should make it very clear that there's no indication that is the case whatsoever. Yeah. And FanDuel actually gave us comment as well, didn't they, to say that there was, they're not in licensed entity in Florida, so they won't comment on this legislation specifically. So I think it's just important to make that clear.
Yeah. Here's what I will say too. You've covered so much of the U.S. space and listened to these hearings. The biggest problem with gaming bills in the United States is that very often you get well-intentioned lawmakers who don't understand gaming at all. So I think with revolving door bills, the thing that always makes me a little nervous about them is who else do you want in charge of helping make sure this happens? Lobbying, you have to be very careful. Campaign donations, you have to be very careful. But as in every industry in the United States, gaming is very similar, that draft legislation is very often prepared in tandem with the private industry it is affecting. And you don't want, these sweetheart deals necessarily, but you also don't want situations where people are proposing amendments that just don't make any sense. I'll reflect back on Missouri, for example, there was an amendment and this was it was a poison pill amendment designed to kill it anyways, that was going to charge $6 every time someone logged into their sports betting app. You know what I mean? This is just not something that anyone in the industry would ever treat with any sort of like seriousness as an idea. And it's just, you have people who don't understand that is not how that really works with online gaming. You log in to just check how your bet's doing or what the cash out value is, not to wager. So yeah, it's an interesting one.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I see the intention behind this bill. You know, there are situations where it's a bad look, but you know, these people in high office and regulatory roles, what if they were to leave their jobs? You know, it would be a waste of their experience if they were to be banned.
They're going to go work at McDonald's? Like, what are they going to do?
Exactly. These people can't be locked into their regulatory jobs forever. And then what are they just supposed to leave the industry behind and never work in it again, despite having all that expertise? It doesn't. I don't think that sits as well with me.
Yeah, it doesn't quite sit right with me either.
No.
But it's a tricky issue. It's a thorny issue. It's just one that it's an interesting bill. You can check out the story about it on SBC Americas. We will have tons more content about bills and such going forward as we near kind of the end of legislation in several states, or the legislative session in several states rather. So check that out there. Check out what Charlie and his team is working on across the SBC network, and be sure to come back tomorrow and check out another episode of iGaming Daily.
Thank you for listening to today's iGaming Daily podcast, supported by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market. If you want to find out more about some of the subjects raised today, feel free to explore any of the sites in the SBC News network or check out the latest edition of the SBC Leaders magazine. Happy reading.